John Gilbert, Part 3. Louis B. Mayer was against John Gilbert co-starring in Garbo's next film, an adaptation of Anna Karenina entitled Love. Although she was supposed to star with Ricardo Cortez, someone let it slip to Variety that Jack would replace Cortez and co-star with her in the film, giving birth to the financial grail of a tagline, Garbo and Gilbert are in love. Furthermore, Garbo got her raise, her preferred leading man was cast in the film with her, and Mayer's hands were tied because the public was already responding enthusiastically to this reunion of the screen's two great lovers. Love, a condensed version of Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, saw Jack playing Vronsky to Garbo's Anna. Take a look at this scene. It shows Vronsky entering a room and immediately becoming captivated by Anna. What I noticed about Jack's performance here is that he has quite excitement about him, a twinkle in his eye as he sees the woman to whom he is falling in love. It has the mischievousness of his character from Bartley's or The Merry Widow, but reminds us of the sheer passion from Flesh and the Devil. To me, it is obvious that Garbo brought about a fire in Jack like no other leading lady could. He seems to exude love and desire for this woman. Of course, it helped that he loved this woman in real life as well, but nevertheless, Jack's work in these lover or romantic hero type of roles was only becoming stronger with each picture that he made. Yes, Garbo could have been the catalyst, but perhaps more accurately, she was the muse. Mick LaSalle in Dangerous Men sums it up like this. He does what men in the audience would not do, but Gilbert would. He leers. He doesn't avert his eyes from the vision of beauty. Garbo here. He isn't afraid. He had the range of a manic depressive, quick to laugh, but often as if standing on a trapdoor that might open into despair. In other words, as I argued in part 1, it's rather impossible to pigeonhole Jack in a certain screen persona because even when he was playing a specific character type, his portrayal was much more complicated than even what was given to him in the script. The artistry of his acting continued to grow. And how did the pairing of Garbo assist with his continuous growth as an actor? Variety put it like this. They are in a fair way of becoming the biggest box office team this country has yet known. Both are strong away from each other and have proved it, but combine that double strength with a reasonable story and who or what can stop it. Love was another hit for Jack and Greta, making almost $2 million at the box office in 1927, which would be close to $35 million today, and getting positive reviews across the board. Jack moved into 1928. Remember, now he was number 5 at the box office, with The Cossacks, another critical and commercial hit with Renee Adoree, and Four Walls, which reunited him with Joan Crawford, who recalled later that he was much more positive and full of life during the shoot than their previous film. It also was a critical and commercial hit. The Masks of the Devil got Jack raves again for his acting, although it was not as big a hit commercially. He finished 1928 in A Woman of Affairs, reunited with Garbo on the screen. Although the film was another box office hit and got Garbo raves, Jack's role was not quite as interesting as usual, and according to Photoplay, he played an awfully thankless, spineless part, all for love, but I'll take it. Garbo and Jack were reunited with director Clarence Brown, who corroborated that Jack did the film just to work with Garbo again and to give her star a chance to shine even brighter at the expense of his own. Clarence stated, I thought that Gilbert might object to the short footage in which he had in the picture became in comparison to his co-star. He had but a small percentage of the film. I proposed that I add something to his part, making it bigger. Gilbert said, I'd rather you didn't touch my part a bit. If we do, we might weaken the story. Therefore, Jack didn't mind that his part was smaller than Garbo's, and he didn't mind that his character was not as flashy as usual. He not only appreciated the challenge of building such a character, so different from all of his usual others, but he also appreciated that his character had less to do to let Garbo's character flourish in the film. To sum it up, Clarence said, that's what I call idealism in an actor, and God knows it's rare in Hollywood. Gilbert's one of the best. Moving into 1929, most studios and actors in Hollywood were attempting to adapt to the new talkie technology. Jack, like Greta Garbo, seemed to resist it at first. He made one more silent, Desert Nights, that got decent reviews for him. He then was enlisted with the other MGM star talent pool, minus Garbo and Lon Chaney, to appear in the Hollywood Review of 1929, in which MGM would introduce its stars' speaking voices and singing voices to their audiences. Jack was given the task of performing the classic balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet with his former co-star Norma Shearer. Jack and Norma were confident and comfortable with the Shakespearean text. Perhaps Jack had performed Shakespeare on the Road with his mother all those years before. Right after Jack and Norma finished the balcony scene, as written, they performed it in a modern 1920s flapper-like dialogue as a satirical representation of Hollywood's rewriting of the classics when making movies. For example, his picture Love the previous year. Jack and Norma got great reviews for their scene. The New York Times said it was a bit nicely done. The sound tones are quite good. Reviewer Brooks Atkinson said, "For a few minutes, Jack Gilbert and Norma Shearer speak the glowing verses of the balcony scene. You are startled by the potentialities of sound." Other critics said that Jack's speaking voice was quite adequate and pleasing. Here we already have some early evidence to use as a counter-argument against the legend of his voice being unsuitable for the talkies. However, the next two movies that he made were the two films that were pivotal to his achieving success as a talkie actor and were unfortunately influential in his losing some of his star power. But again, it was more complicated than that. Jack filmed Redemption, a film he ended up hating and requested to have shelved first, but his Glorious Night, filmed second, was released first in 1929. According to Leatrice Fountain, Jack was enthusiastic about the light comedy story which concerned a military officer trying to woo a cold princess. The movie was released in September of 1929, and the legend has it that Jack was laughed off the screen. His voice was too high, and the audience could not take him seriously. Apparently, the audiences did find the film humorous, but there were some other reasons behind that did not include Jack or his speaking voice. First of all, it was a light comedy, after all. Second, apparently the writing was not the best, and the overall production was not the best either, leading to the film overall to get mixed reviews from the critics. But as far as I can discover, Jack received almost universally positive notices for his performance, with the exception of just a few that really blamed the writing and the direction instead of him. Mordaunt Hall of the New York Times was one of the critics that gave such a mixed review for the film, but a positive one for Jack. He wrote, "It is evident that the producers intend to keep Mr. Gilbert before the public as the screen lover, for in this current narrative he constantly repeats, 'I love you,' to the princess as he kisses her. In fact, his many protestations while embracing her cause a large female contingent in the audience to giggle and laugh. Mr. Gilbert's responsibility does not lie with his lines, and therefore he is to be congratulated on the manner in which he handles the speaking role. His voice is pleasant, but not one which is rich in nuance. His performance is good." Another critic wrote, "The Gilbert love scenes are so intense that they made the women let out nervous giggles. He really gives a great performance in a role perfectly suited for him. Gilbert could not have found a better or more entertaining vehicle for his talking debut." Still another critic said, "His diction is faultless. He's had a little too much training, perhaps." The New York American wrote, "Any doubt as to Jack Gilbert's success in the talkies is dispelled by his appearance in His Glorious Night." The one negative review that I could find from Variety, which pretty much called Jack's lover image silly now that it had dialogue, but went on to say that the dialogue was, quote-unquote, inane. So even with this negative review for Jack, pretty much it pointed that the script was the real culprit in the film's failure. So what really happened? Even contemporary historians have stated that His Glorious Night was a critical and commercial flop, when there are clear sources that say that it actually wasn't. I think the legend of Jack's demise with this film is so strong that it can only take hold of any argument about it, when in reality he did make a good transition to the talkies but just suffered from a few production elements that were made poorly. First, the script was not the best. Second, as one critic pointed out, the laughter was more from a place of discomfort and nervousness rather than a place of making fun of Jack Gilbert. Remember how intense his eyes looked in Flesh and the Devil and Love in the romantic scenes? They were probably the same in His Glorious Night, but this time there was dialogue to accompany his eyes. The combination of his exciting seduction of the princess with him being forced to repeat the phrase, "I love you," over and over and over to her probably not only made the audience feel awkward, but also unsure of how to react. Therefore, nervous laughter. Why was the great lover having to repeat, "I love you" over and over? Wasn't it obvious? Or another explanation was that the scene was genuinely supposed to be funny and the audience laughed accordingly. The only full print of this film is in the Library of Congress, so I cannot make a concrete conclusion until I see the full film myself. What I want you to remember here is that Jack did get some good reviews. Reviewers were kind about his voice. The only negative thing said about his voice was that it sounded too trained, which he probably did practice diction exercises in large supply because I'm sure he was nervous about this huge transition, as were most of his peers. I cannot find the box office information about His Glorious Night, but Leatrice Fountain mentions that it had a modest success, but nowhere near his former successes. I also want to bring up that she admits her father did have some other negative reviews for His Glorious Night, but no more than he had for any of his other previous big hits. Also quickly, before I move on, remember the feud with Louis B. Mayer? A lot of folks, including Louise Brooks and Douglas Fairbanks Jr., stated that Mayer probably deliberately did two things to the film to ensure that it would not be as big a hit as possible. Number one, he let it be cut carelessly in post, which might explain the sloppy way the writing sounds. Second, he could have ordered the sound design to do something to the microphones when Jack spoke. Clarence Brown, Jack's former director, even told Leatrice Fountain later that someone ordered them to turn off the bass and only record Jack with the treble. Were these stories true? Was Mayer still out to destroy Jack? Well, I don't know. Do I doubt if Mayer hated Jack? No, I don't. That's pretty clear. But Fountain argues that it would have been silly for Mayer to risk not making money for his biggest star's talking picture debut, which I agree with. What he could have done was to ensure that the script and the film were not as carefully supervised and edited as previous films, so that his talkie debut was not as impressive as, say, Garbo's and Anna Christie the next year. Jack also recently had signed a $1 million contract renewal with MGM, with other studio executives besides Mayer that pissed Mayer off. So it's plausible he was hoping Jack would make a few talkie stinkers and just go away. But again, His Glorious Night was not really a stinker, more of just an awkward transition for a huge star to a brand new medium. Jack was not alone in his first talkie film being slightly awkward, trust me. But now let's move on to his next released film, Redemption. As I mentioned earlier, it was actually filmed first, but Jack was unhappy with it and asked for it to be shelved. After the mixed reactions to His Glorious Night, Jack, if you'll remember, took his career very seriously and was already contemplating if this was the end of his stardom. And he began to worry about when he would make his next picture. Leatrice Fountain argues that it should have been a new adventure film like The Barleys the Magnificent or Monte Cristo, something to get him back in the forefront while he was still popular with audiences. Instead, Mayer released Redemption, which as a film got mostly universal negative reviews. It did not help that it was not public knowledge that it was filmed prior to His Glorious Night. One reviewer wrote it would not aid Gilbert's status as a talkie star. Variety called it dull, sluggish, and agonizing, but did not blame Jack for that and insinuated that he was the victim in the situation and a bright spot in the film. Liberty Magazine said that the quality of Gilbert's voice is good, it records pleasantly, contrary to the rumors we've heard about. However, the New York Times called his performance, sadly, not natural. Redemption was also released just 6 months after the stock market crash, and audiences perhaps were not as prone to enjoy extremely depressing dramas, especially ones about such a rather unlikable character like Jack's character Fedya. The Herald Tribune stated that the film would have been impossible for any actor. Just at a time when Gilbert needs a good film and a strong support, he is submerged in a lot of hooey. Why was this film ever even an option for Jack? Could it be that Mayer was trying to give Jack lesser material? Perhaps, but it was based on another story by Tolstoy, like Love, so it may have been hoped that he would have another triumph. Furthermore, Jack probably thought this type of character was an interesting one to portray. As you remember, he always loved a challenge in developing a complicated, uncommon type of character. Mick LaSalle argues that with Redemption, the studio tried to emphasize the brooding, poetic side of Gilbert's personality. Why was it not a well-received film? I think it's safe to say the writing and overall production had a lot to do with that. Some have argued that his style of acting from the silent era was too over-the-top in films like Redemption, but personally I think his performance in Redemption is very fascinating. Take a look at this clip. To me, it harkens back to Monte Cristo. Jack got a chance to sink his teeth into another dramatic tour de force. As you saw, he puts his entire body into his performance of this monologue. As the emotions crescendo, his physicality gets larger and larger until he reaches the breaking point of tears and actual physical collapse. Was it very, very physical? Yes. Could that have been seen as a more silent film appropriate tool? Perhaps. But the large expressiveness of his physicality grew gradually in his monologue. He wasn't at 100% the entire time. It reminds me of James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, or Montgomery Clift in From Here to Eternity, or either John Dahl or Farley Granger in Rope. Maybe it wasn't that Jack's acting here was quote-unquote old-fashioned as much as it was too intense and realistic for the audiences at the time to appreciate during the Great Depression. It's one of those performances that are so real and so good that you aren't sure if you can handle watching it more than once just because of how moving the emotions are. But that's just me. I will say that had Redemption been made in 1956 or even 2016, I think Jack would have gotten better reviews. Stay tuned now with me for Jack Gilbert Part 4.